Hi, welcome to a new episode of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast, in which we talk all things sustainability with some of the most distinguished experts in the cannabis industry. I'm your host, Rodrigo Pereira, VP of Product Management at GrowIQ. Today, I'll be talking with Hannah Shanes, VP of Operations and Chief Compliance Officer at 365 Cannabis, and Steve Carlson, CTO of Buddy's Brands. We'll talk about the role enterprise resource planning software, typically known as ERP, plays in a cannabis business and the role software can play in furthering sustainability in their operation. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast. Today we have two amazing guests with us. Hannah Shanes from 365 Cannabis. Hannah is their compliance officer and VP of operations, and has a fascinating background altogether. And we also have Steve Carlson, CTO of Buddy's Brands, one of the biggest brands in the West Coast. With just an amazing background in tech and seed to sales software. So thank you so much, both of you, for being on and welcome.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Happy to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So we'll start off just with getting a little bit of background from both of you in terms of, how did you make your way into the cannabis industry? And, since we're talking specifically about sustainability, how'd that interest come about? So Hannah, I'll pass it over to you and it'd be awesome to hear a little bit about that.
Absolutely. Well, I had a strange journey into the cannabis industry coming out of the military intelligence community. So I actually was involved in compliance in that space, which you can imagine, another heavily regulated space. And I came out interested in working for the government in the state of Colorado. And at that time, the Colorado Department of Revenue Marijuana Enforcement Division was hiring. So I interviewed in a sort of generic sense for a few different open positions, and they were standing up their data analytics cell, and thought I would be a good fit to help spearhead that initiative, which was really meant to help the enforcement division take advantage of the data that they were collecting in the metric seed to sale tracking solution. Up to that point, they hadn't been using the software very effectively. So we created a training program. We really started to provide insight both to the licensing section as well as the enforcement section on how to use the data that's stored and reported into the metric solution for enforcement actions or to help fill gaps in regulations. So that was an exciting time. I then left the state and actually went to work directly for Metric before coming to work for 365 Cannabis in my current role. With respect to sustainability, it was always clear to me that the cannabis industry had an opportunity to do things completely differently and to rewrite the script on how to both optimize productivity while keeping sustainability in mind. And it's so tightly connected to the culture of cannabis and the medicinal properties of this amazing plant that currently have us all employed in this new and exciting space. And then I have a personal commitment to sustainability and a more zero waste lifestyle after having had my son. So very interested in it from a personal respect, and then very interested in how we can use technology to help increase and optimize efficiencies towards sustainability and how cannabis as an industry can lead the way.
Awesome. And I completely understand that personal side of things. I mean, I think that changes your perspective a lot from my perspective. Having children definitely does that. And I'll just ask one more follow-up question. Seeing your background, you have experience as a Chinese cryptological linguist. It'd be awesome to hear a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So my position with the U.S. Army was as a Chinese cryptologic linguist. So I had the privilege to attend the Defense Language Institute, which is at the Presidio of Monterey in California, and spend 63 weeks in intensive language training that included 8 weeks abroad, so that I could fulfill the duties of my position for the military.
That's fascinating. That's very, very cool. Steve, now I'll pass it over to you and same questions. How'd you make it into cannabis, and where's this interest for sustainability coming into what you do?
I think we all have kind of interesting, kind of tertiary ways we got into this, right? So I kind of have an interesting way of getting into it as well. I was working with a medical startup on digital identity, and one of the board members was very influential in Massachusetts politics, and they were getting ready to legalize cannabis in that state. So he asked me if I'd be interested in helping them build an in-house seed-to-sale platform for the state of Massachusetts to start managing the medical side of it, but then also kind of merge that into adult use. And my background had been developing compliance software. So just like Hannah, my background had been, basically in regulated applications and development of applications for regulated industries. One of my prior projects was I actually worked on the Affordable Care Act for a little while on the back end for integrating the different systems. So he shipped me out to Colorado for 30 days and had me sit with a bunch of the assets that he had relationships with. And then when I came back, I actually spent a few years writing an integration platform for actually pulling and synchronizing data with Metric. So that's kind of how I got into it from the software side. As far as sustainability goes, I've always really felt that there was, like Hannah mentioned, a really tight link between efficiency, optimization, and sustainability, right? So, I think we all have a responsibility to make where we live a little bit better every day. And I think that I'm lucky that technology is very tightly integrated with that, and it's pretty easy for us to be conscious of that and make sure that that we're improving sustainability as well as becoming better operators.
Fantastic. Yeah, and Steve, I also noticed, I guess from a personal point of view, you really like working on cars. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'm actually a tinkerer, and I don't know. I thought that was really common with technical people, but I guess it's really not. But I restored a car in high school with my dad, a '66 Chevelle Super Sport. He sold it when I went to college, so I've always kind of had a love for old cars. So I'm restoring a '65 Lincoln Continental convertible right now, and I just like to get my hands dirty every once in a while. I think I sit in front of a screen so much that there's something very appealing to me about physical, like watching something go from being a disaster to something beautiful physically, right?
That, and yeah, completely understand. I think after you spend enough time in front of the keyboard, you want to go and do something very tangible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you can see your results immediately as soon as you're done fixing something, and there's a lot of gratification.
Fantastic. And Steve, just to follow up, if you could just give us a little bit of background on Buddy's brand in terms of the scope of what you guys do and what markets you serve, that'd be really good to hear.
Yeah, so we're a West Coast company in Oregon, Washington, and California. And essentially, we're a multi-state operator that's vertically integrated across, cultivation. We even have a couple retail stores, but we really concentrate on live resin and really focus on the concept of soil to oil, and as well as our lifestyle brand of Buddies. We really try to focus on community and bettering our local communities.
Awesome. Fantastic. So, I think in general, as we see the cannabis industry evolve, obviously, software systems will be at the core of that. And I want to pass this first question over to you. Like you mentioned, cannabis is a relatively new industry, kind of up and coming. So, what do you think are some of the best practices that operators and companies like yourself, like 365 Cannabis, can look at in mature industries to drive sustainability within cannabis?
Absolutely. I think that's a great question. I think a missed lesson in the cannabis space is often to build from best practice. There's some interconnectivity in this space because of the very nature of the legalization paradigm in the US being both on the medical front and on the recreational front, where we see the opportunity to take best practices from the pharmaceutical industry, from the food and beverage industry, from all around us, really. So some of those best practices and things that we can explore are certainly waste management practices, additives for optimizing growth while not harming the environments and certainly polluting the product. And then also supply chain and inventory management for optimization, ensuring that you track those inputs, use your data analytics well to ensure that optimization and make sure that you're thinking of sustainability not only from the environmental perspective, but from funding and profits perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I mean, I think we tend to associate sustainability with, like you said, kind of the environmental side, but at the same time, if businesses themselves are not sustainable, you don't have champions within the industry that can drive that and drive that message from a business and then environmental impact perspective. Steve, I guess I'll pass that over to you. I mean, I think your background in working in the medical industry, doing some work with the ACA is very relevant to this. So yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Hannah said. I think that, I think that there's really great examples from every other industry that exists. And for some reason, there's always been this hesitation to kind of reach out to other verticals to gain that expertise and to kind of merge that in. It's one of the reasons why I did partner with 365 is because I really believe that they've taken best practices from many other verticals and kind of merged that. It brought that expertise into the cannabis industry. And I really think that that's what's really, really necessary for this industry is a ground up, kind of approach to focusing on what's only happening in cannabis. I think is often misses like kind of the broader aspects of like Hannah said, supply chain management and everything else that they wouldn't normally think is an issue. But it is, they'll find out soon enough. Right.
That's a super interesting point because especially I think when you think about scaling businesses, I mean, they will run into some of the challenges that, let's say, traditional verticals will run into. So, might as well leverage those experiences and use that experience that's out there in the market and parallel markets to obviously drive more efficiencies within cannabis. So, yeah, that's a fantastic point. So, the next question, I think when we tend to think about cannabis and the cannabis industry, our minds usually go to cultivation and then, kind of the product side. And making that connection, like the one-to-one connection between the role software plays in sustainability might not be completely clear. So, and then I'll pass this back to you. I think, what role do you see software playing in sustainability? And for example, if you have examples in terms of how 365 might be doing some of that, it'd be great to hear as well.
Certainly, yeah. So I think we've tickled it before, but I think conceptually how software helps sustainability predominantly is in allowing companies to leverage their data analytics and execute gap analytics to ensure that they have optimized, efficient processes. So what we see even in the implementation process is this revisiting of the processes in place at an entity from cultivation all the way through retail store operations to say, are we doing this to the greatest effect? And how can we do this better? And the data collected and just the very act of feeding a data beast that's driving data analytics on the back end forces your entire company to conceptualize their activities on the floor in a way that feeds data analytics and drives perpetual iterative improvement in your organization. So I think that that's the key. When you think of software and sustainability, it can seem so far apart, but I think that that's really why it's key to consider your technology partners and in particular, the consolidation of your software and tools, really.
And I think you touched on something really important, which is obviously using this data collection to make your operation more efficient. And sometimes that requires a bit of a cultural change or mindset change for companies that might not be used to having that mindset. Do you think there's also not only a software component to that, but also a mindset cultural change within a company that has to go along with that?
Certainly. And that's probably one of the biggest challenges that we face in implementing a Microsoft-based enterprise resource planning solution. It's not altogether intuitive. It's a process-driven software. So if we're going into an entity that has not defined processes for themselves, or isn't really strong on the justification for why processes are the way they are, it can be a difficult journey. And our commitment to all of our partners is to go on that journey and to match that level of interest in what they're doing and what they want to do in their vision for their company, both short-term and long-term, to ensure that that software tool is configured adequately to provide them both the stability, but then also the flexibility. As we've seen, so much momentous scaling occur in this space, you have to be ready to not only operate efficiently at the level that you're at, but to be poised at any moment to massively upskill.
So, Steve, I'd be really interested in getting your perspective from, say, a customer and end user, and again, probably the same questions for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the biggest thing I would say is, technology is always an evolution, and I think in that evolution, you really believe that where you're at, you're doing a really good job of it. But I think the biggest issue that I've always had is that and I don't know if this is clear, but you don't know what you don't know, right? And I think we had very, very clear SOPs and had done a lot of effort to kind of nail down, how we do things. But I think, what we were missing was, what can we not see, or what are we missing in the correlation of all of this data, right? And so I think that's where software plays the biggest part in sustainability. Is it shows you what you didn't know. And, unfortunately or fortunately, it's pretty stunning what you don't know, right? Once you get some of this data together and put it together and realize, what it is you've been missing, or the things that you didn't think were affecting your end results, and then they're massively affecting those results. I think you can only get that from a unified piece of data management. I don't care how good you are at spreadsheets or writing SOPs, you won't know what you're actually doing until you have a piece of software in there that's telling you.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point in terms of kind of a broader theme. I mean, not only in the cannabis industry, but obviously in many industries at large is the idea of digital transformation, right? And at some point, there's so much complexity that if are able to have a repository, it becomes impossible to manage.
Absolutely. I'm always saying to my staff, like, what do we not know? Like, what is this telling us that we didn't know, right? And that moves us towards solving those problems. And I just can't see how you could do that with, disconnected systems and spreadsheets and folders. And, there's just a point in time where you as an operator become mature enough that it's just necessary to do something different.
Yeah, exactly. So I think this kind of brings me to the next question, which is, I guess, generally, what kind of software should cannabis companies be looking to support their sustainability efforts? And I'll start with you.
Our software, of course, Rodrigo. a little lefty there.
I love it.
No, so it's an important question because software is a tool, and companies have to understand what kind of tool is best suited to their requirements and budget at a given time, and their ability to make the best use of that tool and to be successful in implementing that tool truly. So they have to consider the various softwares on the market, so many of which are sort of modified seed to sale tracking solutions that really do support flat inventory tracking for regulatory compliance purposes, which may be sufficient for their operations today. But if they are looking to optimize efficiency, to automate their inventory tracking and ordering for inputs and forecast into the future, then they probably want something that's more vertically integrated and is closer to an enterprise resource planning solution. So you want to pick the tool that suits not only your short-term objectives, but those long-term objectives like we talked about, but then also pick the implementation partner, assessing their level of commitment to your success. Because if you're a smaller organization with a small team, but you know you're going to need enterprise resource planning capabilities down the road, you really need to know that you have a heavy-handed partner that's willing to go on that journey with you and get you there implemented with the tool as you can consume it today, but then also use it into the future. So I think it's a very introspective exercise for an entity to determine what the best tool is for them, what their appetite is for an implementation of software, and then the likelihood that they'll see success given the inner dynamics of these entities at the point at which they're at in time. So I think that's the first step. I know it sounds a little bit hippy-dippy in terms of introspectively considering your book, but it really is foundational, just in business process considerations for companies in any industry. So here is no exception. And it's really important to consider the tool. But certainly, as we see in the regulatory space in the United States, many times that vertical integration piece, whether it's mandated, as was the start in many of these markets, or whether it's just best operating model for multi-state operators as they come to acquire licenses across the country, you're going to see that you have a requirement to track from start to finish, from through seed at the cultivation level and your inputs and all of those things through the retail activity at the dispensary or retail licenses. And the only way you can really get that comprehensive data is with enterprise resource planning tools.
Yeah, that's great. And I love how you framed it in terms of it being an introspective process. And Steve, I guess I'll turn that to you. Obviously, 365 Cannabis and Buddy's Brands have a really good relationship, and there being a number of these systems out in the market. I guess from your perspective, what were you looking for in that ERP system, and what differentiated 365 from your perspective?
Yeah, so my background and expertise is actually application integration. That's kind of where I've always been called in on. And I've always had a really strong belief that the way you're successful is the clear and free exchange of data between your different systems. So I think it's really important to enforce what Hannah said. You really need to pick, first of all, pick the app that actually fits your needs. And I think we often don't really look deeply enough into what the company needs to actually do well. A good example is that Metric is a regulatory system. It is not an inventory system, right? And I think if you're looking to Metric to be an inventory system, it's not going to be terribly successful at doing that for you. So I think that it's picking the right tool. And then the other thing that I've learned, and maybe this is evolution, but you can't always integrate applications freely and get that data exchange. So I've kind of realized over time, maybe in my older age, that having a system that is vertically integrated and designed to exchange that data, is definitely the shortest path to success. It's there's a lot of that foresight put into the design of a vertically integrated system. And I think we're definitely seeing the benefits of that forward thinking versus a group of disparate systems that we all have to kind of massage the data between.
That's fantastic. I think this is a really good lead in into my next question, which is, when a cannabis organization's being stood up, when's the best time to implement ERP? And Steve, I guess you've gone through that, so I'll start with you, and then and I'd love to get your perspective as well.
Yeah, I would tell you, you need the software now, whether you realize it or not, right? And I think that's a really hard acceptance because there is some cost involved in implementing it, and most of that's tied around labor and training. The software. I don't want to oversimplify the software, but the technical aspect and software aspect of the operating system is relatively insignificant in comparison to, like Hannah said earlier, your processes and methodologies, etc. But you're going to benefit so much from that the earlier you do that. I think as time goes by and you establish yourself in, I wouldn't say bad processes, but maybe not as sustainable processes as they should be, they're really difficult to change and really kind of revert, right? So I think the earlier the better. I will tell you that new entities that we establish moving forward will have 365, operating from day one there, right?
And Hannah, again, I'll turn it over to you. From your experience for the 365 cannabis side, what's your perspective, and have you run into different scenarios in which companies have adopted ERP at different stages, and maybe how those scenarios went?
Certainly. I really liked Steve's answer because instinctively my answer was also now. When should cannabis companies implement? And we have seen implementations that have been successful in all circumstances. So brand new licenses being stood up in a new regulatory space. So a state that's just opening, just laying its regulatory framework. We've got customers in the Canadian space, right, where we have a very different regulatory environment, South Africa, Colombia, Australia. So we've seen it in large entities, multi-state operators, where the end user's license to use the software number, in the tens of users to the effect. I mean, we're talking like 75 folks actively inputting data to match their processes on the floor. And then we have some entities that are a matter of 4 total users administering the solution, the licenses. So it really is, it's interesting because it's really robust. It's a Microsoft-based tool, but it's not prohibitive if you make the commitment to go on the journey and you know that it's important to be successful. So if you're brand new, maybe you haven't defined your processes, it's a great opportunity to look at what other industries have already created, to that first thing we talked about, right? Take the lessons learned from other spaces. And our base tool, Microsoft Business Central, that we're built upon, is used in hospitality, food and beverage, pharmaceutical, pizza delivery, right? Like you've got it across the world used successfully. And so the processes that are embedded, and that's not to say any of the additional development that we've done to optimize it for the cannabis space, those embedded processes are meant to offer the optimization and efficiencies that you want to start off with from the get-go. That being said, we've also seen a lot of folks that have migrated to our solution. Many folks that migrate one state on a trial basis and then end up working with us to create a strategic national rollout and transition their other entities to the software. So again, it's a journey, and as long as somebody's willing to go on the journey, you can take the initiative and start that journey at any point. But certainly, if you have the opportunity to start out strong and make your technology tool a part of your business plan from the get-go, certainly that's going to create a certain ease on that journey that we'd all be on together.
Yeah, and so now thinking about, I guess, our audience, which would be operators, the question would be, okay, I go and implement an ERP system. The question would be like, how quickly does the software make a difference or have an effect? So I want to start with you, Hannah. What have you seen out there in terms of how quickly this will make a change or a difference in an operation?
I would say it depends on the metrics, right? So what are we looking for to change? Because you will see an immediate impact as we do the discovery process and optimize those processes. That increases efficiency the moment that that's executed. Now, the implementations are driven by our customer timelines. We've created this situation where we've productized the enterprise resource planning solution in a way that allows us to implement much more quickly than you would typically see a standard ERP rollout, say in steel manufacturing, where they have 18 to 24 months and it's multi-million-dollar project and they have people embedded on the ground. We can do this delivery remote. We have this information from our experience that allows us to be more proactive and agile in that way. So you're going to see the immediate impact in that process review, gap analytics, so that we create efficiencies as we go. If that implementation occurs quickly because we have a match on the customer side, they're well organized, able to implement and commit, then on the back end, you can start to generate reporting immediately. We do have embedded Power BI capabilities, so we can create those gorgeous dashboards that you see nowadays. Executive Suite for the users in the cultivation space. We have several large operators that have the real-time data flowing into the cultivation space on television screens, updating folks on the jobs that they're going to be working against that day. Things in tune. So you really do see it quite quickly. But you do have to consider that the reports are driven by the data, and the team has to be dedicated to getting the system operational so that they can input that data and we can consolidate it and really run those analytics off of it. So
that's super interesting. And Steve, I kind of again want to ask you from the end user or customer perspective. I guess that same question: how quickly did you notice? You using the data that was being generated through 365 Cannabis to make a difference on the operation, or you leverage to push through optimization?
So I think, we went through a really formal evaluation. I think, determining, what software is the right fit for your company and that it's going to be, meeting your goals is super important. Maybe one of the best, most important decisions that you're going to make. And one of the reasons why we, narrowed down 365 from 6 other vendors was that they really supported embracing where you're at the time, right? So if you've spent a lot of time on one aspect of your business, 365 was very open to having your team, intimately participate in, finishing out that aspect of the rollout and getting it there. So it does absolutely speed up the process when you've got the ability to cooperate your internal resources and 365 resources together. So I think that's really what set them apart as far as speed to benefit, was that they were the only vendor really that was going to work with us to reduce costs on that implementation and improve speed. Now, as far as benefits go, I will tell you it is pretty much immediate, whether or not you even do get those reports, immediately. I think a lot of the employees, when you're implementing, the light kind of goes off as you're implementing it, right? So if you vet out a process with, a super user or an employee, and then they can see the benefit to what they're doing versus, typing into a spreadsheet, then the light goes off there, and that benefit is maybe immeasurable. They get it and they understand, what the company is looking for, how it benefits efficiency and sustainability almost immediately. So I do think there's those sometimes intangible benefits that happen right away, right?
That's super interesting. I think what I'm taking out of the conversation and is that it's as much about the software, and a complementary aspect to that is obviously the level of engagement. If that level of engagement didn't exist and you guys didn't have the input that you have into the system, it wouldn't be nearly as effective.
Right. If an employee is just typing in how many cartridges they manufactured or how many they put in a box or how many stickers they put on, it's really easy for them to disassociate with why they're actually doing that. But when they have a dashboard and they have processes that they're responsible for and a manufacturing calendar and planning calendars, and they can see the bigger picture of what they're actually involved in and what they're responsible for, I think that intangible benefit is realized almost instantly. And I think that's inherently your people become more engaged and interested in being efficient and sustainable
Amazing. So we're coming to the stretch of the podcast. I want to ask you, both of you, one last question. So if you had a crystal ball, I guess, where do you see the future of ERP and I guess software use in general going in the cannabis industry? And obviously we're talking about sustainability and where do you see the impact there? So Hannah, I'll pass it over to you.
That's a great question. I think that we'll continue to see consolidation activity in the space. I know in the Canadian space, they've had a bit of an equity crunch. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually we see a little bit of that in the US, but right now folks are pretty optimistic, right, about the possibility of continued movements towards broader legalization and activities there. So I think we'll start to see the bigger players in the software industry coming into the space more heavily. Of course, there will be a bit of a lead time there where they have to get their mind around cannabis industry specifics. So we've had a bit of a jump on it, and we're very fortunate to have done so and to have the background that we have with the variety of accounts that we've served over the last 4.5 years. So I think we'll start to see some of that, but I do think we'll start to see people realize the benefits of transitioning away from the flatter inventory tracking that seed to sale provides and into the more dynamic tracking that you see in the enterprise resource planning space. You've got to have the capability to automate your ordering of inputs on the low end, up to and including your personal protective equipment, up through forecasting your sales, bucketing your product baskets based on the analytics of, what folks are most likely to purchase and getting those real-time analytics uploaded to your dashboards for any number of audiences, right? Both the users, as we discussed, operating in the solution in your licensed facilities, but then also your executives and your shareholders. And we're going to continue to see those shareholder groups grow as well, right? And the diversity of those groups in the cannabis space is enormous. So it's just such an exciting thing. And I do think we'll continue to see a trend where that movement occurs, but it's no easy lift. And so both parties have to be committed to making it happen. But I think we'll see that that's a priority for licensed entities here now and into the future.
That's fascinating. And I just love, it's a super optimistic picture. I think, obviously there's not a lot of opportunity there. Steve, I guess from your perspective, from the MSO side, I'll pass the crystal ball over to you and the same question.
This industry is maturing, and I think operators are maturing, and I think even the least technical operators are keenly aware of how difficult it is. The margin in this industry is extraordinarily challenging, and I think even if you're non-technical, you very quickly realize the benefits of optimization. And I think more and more people are maturing and realizing that and understanding that, we won't survive on a larger scale if we can't have the kind of insight and detail and data that an integrated piece of software provides, right? So I think, to Hannah's point, I think this is just the beginning of software organizations getting into this industry and becoming, more capable of providing the services that people need. And I think that's just going to increase and increase and increase. I started out, I'm a perfect example of that. Like, we started out with a separate inventory system, a separate financial system, a separate logistics system, a separate mapping system. And as an integration expert, I integrated all those together, but it just wasn't enough for us to really know what was going on. And so we evolved. And I'm happy to say that the cannabis industry is, frantically evolving. And I think the need for this kind of vertically integrated software is a necessity and will get even more important.
Well, Steve, with that, it's been a fascinating conversation with both of you. It's just very, very illuminating in terms of the challenges, the opportunities of using data, using ERP systems. But I think also going back to your comment, Hannah, the introspection that has to come with implementing these systems and knowing that deep down as an organization, you want to you want to streamline, you want to optimize, and you want to generate more value. So just incredibly thankful for both of you for your time. Again, we were with Hannah Shanes from 365 Cannabis and Steve Carlson from Buddy's brand. Absolute pleasure to talk to both of you. And I don't know if you have any parting commentary or any thoughts before we sign off.
Not at all. Thank you for the experience and the wonderful questions, Rodrigo. It's been a pleasure talking with you today.
Thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a pleasure.
And thanks, Steve, for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Sustainable Cannabis Coalition podcast. If you like what you heard, tune into our next episode and make sure to check out our content on our website at sustainablecannabiscoalition.com and make sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Yep, we're pretty much everywhere. Till next time.